This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, True Seekers and True Crime Junkies. This is Nanette Bartow. We are back with another day, or another week, should I say, of the Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac presentation. I backtracked a little bit because I had made some earlier mistakes. I wanted to go ahead and clear those up. One of those was the actual spokesperson for Deborah Perez being a disbarred partner of Melvin Bell-Eyes. I had erroneously indicated that that was Effley Bailey, and it was actually Kevin Mclean. Interesting to note, though, that both of these individuals had been partners of Melvin Bell-Eye, and both of these individuals had, in fact, been disbarred. Some of the information that I was able to look up on Effley Bailey was rather interesting. He actually represented a lot of these cases that we're talking about, or someone involved in these cases, such as the Sam Shepard case, the Boston Strangler, Patty Hearst. We're going to hear a little bit about that because there's a letter in regards to the Zodiac in the SLA movement. He was disbarred in Florida and Massachusetts, and he was disbarred for actually holding on to stocks of a convicted drug dealer. He figured if he transferred those stocks to himself, he knew that a significant increase was going to come in. I don't know if that's insider trading, if he had some information that indicated there was going to be that significant increase. Either way, he transferred those stocks to himself and eventually got busted and was disbarred as an attorney. Now, Kevin Mclean, being another longtime partner, in fact, I believe he was either named as an executor or some type of position in the will of Melvin Bell-Eye, which I thought was extremely interesting, but he was also disbarred. And I think that was due to conduct. I need to dig a little further into that. I wasn't exactly finding what I was looking for to determine what the cause of his disbarment was. But now that we have that straight, we do know now that Deborah Perez was represented by Kevin Mclean. I'm going to go back into the presentation now. Okay, so last week we left off on Paul Whipke, and I kind of rushed through the last slide, so I thought I would just start over and not rush through this one because I think that some of these happenstances are extremely interesting. Now, remember, a lot of the things that I have in this presentation are just due to proximity. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jack committed those crimes. It certainly means that he should be looked at for them, but I think that the things that I've stumbled across as I go through this presentation, there's good reason to bring them up. It's really letting us know or giving us some insight into our history, what was going on, how the mob, the politics, the CIA, and the media all worked together on things, ultimately to advance themselves, either monetarily or otherwise. So in July 10th of 1958, we had 26-year-old Lieutenant Paul Whipke who went missing. He was an aviator, so he did fly, and he was stationed at the Army at Fort Ord in Monterey Bay. We see that up here in the left-hand corner of the map that I've put down, and then we can follow that down to his movements. So it looks like he had driven, and he was reportedly seen, sighted, and had obviously paid for something. They were able to track his whereabouts to the Mojave Desert. In a couple more slides, we're going to be talking about the Mojave again. So every time I hit on something that has multiple happenstances, especially when it's crime related, I feel the need to include that into the presentation and follow that trail. So 4 weeks later, a man is seen driving Paul's car, and evidently he was in a military uniform. We do know that Jack was still currently in the military in 1958, and we have a lot of sightings of an individual in uniform, which might be some of the reasons why people were trusting of Jack, because he appeared to be somebody legitimate or somebody they could trust. Death Valley is where the car is found ultimately. So while Paul Whipke checks in at White's Motel in Mojave Desert, ultimately his car is found another few hours away in Death Valley, and he is never seen again. There is a pile of cigarettes found on the outside of his car, so as if somebody was sitting inside smoking cigarette after cigarette after cigarette, literally. However, I believe it is mentioned that Paul Whipke was not a smoker, so those cigarettes may likely have carried the DNA of the individual who was responsible for either his Paul Whipke going missing or possibly even murdering Paul Whipke and burying him. Either way, in 1982, he was declared died while on duty by the military, and there had been some talk about him having recruited for the CIA. And it seemed that aviators or people who pilots were some of the key people, because we know that during this time they were flying drugs back and forth between the United States and Mexico and other locations. So I had found some information in regards to his brother actually investigating the case. So some of the things I pointed out in here was that the military had at first listed him as absent without leave, and then finally a deserter. His superiors seemed curiously incurious about what had become of this highly promising young man. According to the FBI, the Army made only one most cursory investigation about Whipke's disappearance, assuming that he would eventually return. His brother Carl had actually, like I said, picked up the investigation himself as an Army veteran. He was convinced from the start that the military knew far more about Paul's disappearance than they wanted to say. His suspicions were first alerted when just the day after his brother vanished, he learned that the officers were already packing Paul's belongings for shipment home. This odd haste, he stated, commented dryly, left him super hyper, super quick. They must have known he wasn't coming back. Why else would they have packed him up instead of searching for him? Let's see here. Undaunted, it says Carl accumulated thousands of government documents as well as many sympathetic allies in Congress and the military, but all these efforts just left him going down darker and darker rabbit holes, which I continue to go down on a weekly basis. Carl claimed to have discovered that Paul flew in 5 atomic test explosions in Nevada. I find this extremely interesting since we know that there was an affinity for Jack with the Trinity site, with the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima as they related to the Japanese, and Jack's love of eco back in Japan. He had feelings for this, and of course, all of these things really intrigued Jack. Nuclear power, all of them. So his theory was that Paul was exposed to dangerous levels of radiation during these flights, and he may have seen evidence that the Army was conducting classified experiments on human beings. Although the Army confirmed that Lieutenant Whipke was assigned to temporary duty at Camp Desert Rock, Nevada between July and October of 1957, they dismissed Carl's other claims as unsupported by the evidence. Well, of course, they're not going to give him the evidence, and it's going to be extremely complicated at best to even come across that evidence unless somebody actually blows the whistle. Let's see. It says, however, even the Army report acknowledged that after Paul returned from Nevada, he had developed black moles and plantar warts on his hands and body. Whipke began to complain of an unaccountable feeling of sickness. He lost a large amount of weight, and the normally cool-headed officer became nervous and depressed. This could also be from pressure, doing things that you don't like to do or don't want to do, get yourself wrapped up into something you're not quite sure you want to be a part of, and before you know it, it's making you physically sick. And that is a possibility, of course, on top of the fact that he was literally making flights through radiation zones. Let's see. So several months before he disappeared, the lieutenant had all his teeth removed and was fitted with full dentures. Again, another sign of something that is going on within his body. A fellow officer, Charles Lewis, recalled that after Whipke's Nevada flights, Paul was interviewed by Army intelligence agents. It was noted that these interviews left Whipke nervous and uptight. So again, I'm feeling that there is some type of pressure from above. And we see that in Jack's handwriting. Actually, on a graphology basis, we can see that he's literally receiving pressure from people above him. Paul's actions were always ethical on and off base, said Lewis, but Paul became suspiciously silent to others when the agents were mentioned or appeared on the scene at the airfield or the officers' club. Again, very interesting, almost as if some of these crime scene shows that you see where individuals look up, see somebody they know that's threatened them, and all of a sudden they just go introverted and no longer sociable and don't want to talk with anybody anymore, and that nervousness hits and they're out of there. So that brings us to some other happenstances in 1959. The Cuban Revolution and the rise of Fidel Castro changed the climate for mob investment in Cuba. On that New Year's Eve of 1958, while Batista was preparing to flee to the Dominican Republic and then on to Spain, where he died in exile in 1973, Lansky was celebrating the $3 million he made in the first year of operations at his 440-room, $18 million palace in the Havana. Many of the casinos, including several of Lansky's, were looted and destroyed that night. On January 8th of 1959, Castro marched into Havana and took over, setting up shop in the Hilton. Lansky had fled the day before for the Bahamas and other Caribbean destinations. It looks like we had somebody who took the steps to actually close all the casinos, which really pushed out all of the mobsters. Which I'm going to assume at that point left them with nothing more than the Las Vegas area to run. Las Vegas and let's say South Lake Tahoe. Nevada basically is the only place that they could build their casinos at that time from there on out. So on June 9th of 1959, we have an abduction of a child on a bicycle with her friend. Evidently, it must have been at some point after the friend had dropped her off, because she was being ridden on the handlebars while they were riding around. And then eventually at one point they had separated, and then she came up missing and eventually was found dead. So she was last seen alive riding on the handlebars of her friend Stephen Truscott's bike near Clinton Air Force Base. Again, we have an Air Force Base in the near vicinity. Which is much like most of the crimes that we've talked about. It appears as though these serial killings are occurring where the individual or the suspect can then escape to the protection of the military base and not be looked at twice. And of course, he'll be out of there just as soon as he got there. The body is discovered in a nearby farmwood lot called Lawson's Bush. She was raped and strangled with her own blouse. So again, we have another crime where a piece of clothing is used as the strangulation method. Clothing death like stockings, underwear, dresses, skirts, known to I'm guessing at this point, some of the information that I had read was that Cheryl was known to hitchhike, which is exactly what we see in the Santa Rosa hitchhike murders, that hitchhiking is one of those methods in which the suspect is picking up his victims. Lynn, as she was known, was the daughter of the flying officer Leslie Harper, a supply officer posted to the RCAF station in Clinton, and Shirley Harper was her mother. So again, we have a tie back to somebody who is, again, an officer or a pilot in the military. So I didn't really do a lot of research on her family. I could not find much on it. And the only reason why I bring up the Canada notion is because we will see later in the communications by this killer that there are hints towards Canada, letters from Canada that are mailed out of Canada. So I wanted to put in anything that is a possibility. And we know that Canada was a huge support, or in part involved with training and military with the United States as well. So you could see the coercion of these two countries together, and that means that we are going to see things that are occurring in Canada that are occurring in California, and I believe that there is a reason to look at these, because we know that Jack is consistently writing from either a VA hospital or in regards to the military. In October of 1960, Castro nationalized the island's hotel casinos and outlawed gambling. This action essentially wiped out Lansky's base and revenue streams. He lost an estimated $7 million with the additional crackdown on casinos in Miami. Oh, so evidently we did already have casinos in Miami. Lansky was forced to depend on his Las Vegas revenues, which takes us right back to what I said. The major money was coming out of Nevada. This is the beginning of the takedown of Castro with the attempts of what we call the poison pen. There is belief that this particular pen was hidden in the beehive of a girl's hair and was supposed to have been used on Castro, but it failed, is what some of these codes have been ciphered by Harriet Suchet. And when the Zodiac speaks about the poison pen, he also talks about the downfall of the Kennedys, the Bush's greed for oil, and this will all be covered in this presentation in hopes to bring to light just what the underground rich will do for money. I believe the original version of this poison pen was used on the steel magnate's son in 1948. He is probably complaining that other privileged individuals have unfair advantage in the steel industry or some political agenda or affiliation where a message needs to be sent. The fitting end to a crime syndicate operator, but I do not believe for one second that he died broke like Rockefeller was said to have. You don't get an entire square in New York named after you if you were broke. In 1970, Lansky fled to Israel to escape federal tax evasion charges. So again, we have individuals who are able to just disappear and of course never come under indictment or be penalized for the things they've done. Although the Israel law of return allows any Jew to settle in the state of Israel, the law allows the government to use its discretion to exclude those with criminal pasts. 2 years after Lansky fled to Israel, the Israeli authorities deported him back to the U.S., and the U.S. government brought Lansky to trial with the testimony of loan shark Vincent Fat Vinny Teresa, an informant with little or no credibility. Lansky was acquitted in 1974. Oh, gosh, I'm not shocked by that by any means, because we're going to hear a lot more about how these mobsters inevitably, even if they are convicted, spend little to no time in jail and eventually are pardoned and let out. So Lansky's last years were spent quietly at his home in Miami Beach. He died of lung cancer on January 15th of 1983 at the age of 80, leaving behind a widow and 3 children. On paper, Lansky was worth almost nothing. Of course, they literally know how to work this out to make it look like there's nothing. But at the time, the FBI believed that he had left behind over $300 million in hidden bank accounts, but they never found any money. Never found any money. Seems fitting that someone so clearly involved in corrupt business and crime is acquitted, while other innocent men suffer at the hands of justice for Jack's crimes. So that brings us into 1961. Now, mind you, we did see in Dewhurst's book that Jack ultimately was supposedly had gone to work for GE in 1958, though I have no information to support that. That might just be words of Dennis. I'm not sure how Dewhurst knew that, or even Dennis knew that, because that was nothing I'd ever been told by Dennis. I was very well aware of the 62-63 involvement with General Electric, but we do see that in 1961, actually. So as early as 1961, Jack's completing a mass spectrometer leak detection course in Pasadena, California, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from Riverside, California, where Don, Jack's brother, may already be living at this point in time. We do know he's there in 1966 based on Jack's words, but I researched that it is a 5-day hands-on course in today's world. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it took then. This completion of training was done with Consolidated Electrodynamics Corporation, which was actually founded by Herbert Hoover Jr. in 1937. Kind of a little irony there, since we know that Herbert Hoover Sr. was actually one of the ploys or the hits that the communications were taking target at in the Black Dahlia case. So here we have Jack coming back and actually completing a course under his son. Harold Washburn was hired in 1938 as VP for research with a mandate to develop instruments applicable to petroleum prospecting. So we're back into oils and things of that. It is a lobby of the picture that I have to the right is actually the lobby of the school at the time, and we know that they had involvement with NASA in 1963. They had a physicist down here in the middle picture who was actually operating some of these equipment that's used in this. The mass spectrometer is actually used to detect gas leakage, and so this would be important if in fact Jack was at General Electric, because he was working with nuclear waste, and any type of leakage would have been very important to know of. So the detection of the test gas using mass spectrometers is by far the most sensitive leak detection method, and the one most widely used in the industry even today. What I found interesting about this particular diagram in the mass spectrometer is the arrows. We notice that in a lot of things that Jack does in his communications has all these directional arrows. One of the theories that individuals had told me was that those arrows are used in the editing of newspapers to direct the information or the editor to the proper lines. Here we see that it's also used inside of the diagrams for mass spectrometry. And we know that as an engineer, Jack also used them in his diagrams or his schematics when he was designing things. So the arrows are big, and we're going to see a lot of arrows in these communications. So that's why I threw this one in here. Here we get to see Jack in Pasadena. I am not sure why we put that. Okay, we just covered that. In 1962, we see Jack working on equipment in a picture with the inscription "Test Foreman at General Electric." Device in subject is a 2-phase to 3-phase adapter designed by Jack T. and eventually patented by the company. This is some of the areas that Jack was prolific in. And of course, aside from the ham radio operation, he was very, very intelligent when it came to mechanics and engineering in general. And sometime in 1962, Jack also suffers a back injury, presumably while he's working for General Electric. Doesn't necessarily mean that injury occurred on the job. It could have occurred in one of his little jaunts or killing sprees. We do see other happenstances where literally after what looked like a tragic murder, Jack has been reported with some type of injury that's not consistent with how he describes the occurrence. So that's another thing I always like to bring up. He does have surgery for that back injury in December of 1966 after he returns to California. So that's one of the reasons I know that in late 66 he is back in California, and that coincides with the recollections of family members and stories of Jack. Now, I have brought in the Marilyn Monroe murder. Now, this is only here because I like to complete the path of what's going on politically along with the mob and everything else. And of course, this is simply here not because I believe that Jack actually completed this murder, but because it kind of ties in with some things that are happening. And we're going to see shortly here in about a year a letter that's written in regards to the murder of JFK. And that letter absolutely is written by the same hand as the Zodiac. I have matched that handwriting, and we will do that examination probably next week, I'm assuming. Either way, everybody knows the story of Marilyn Monroe. Everybody knows that she was actually the mistress of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. Obviously, sleeping with these individuals. I question whether or not she might have been one of the socialites that were involved with the MK Ultra program, where the whole entire goal was to get them into bed with somebody so that they could seek out information that would be valuable to others. We also know that Marilyn was involved with members of the mob. So we have this cross connection again between the mob and politics. Either way, she was found in her bed. Death was ruled an acute barbiturate poisoning by Dr. Thomas Noguchi of the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. Jack Clemens, the first officer on the scene, believes she had been murdered. Now, poisoning is something we're going to start stepping our feet into if we haven't already seen it with H.B. Tennyson and with a couple of the other cases. We're going to start to see poisoning as one of the suicides or suicidings that we talk about in this case. It would be very strategic, in my opinion, to do away with Marilyn first, especially if you're going to kill the POTUS, only because she would sing like a bird. Taking her out first allowed them to not have to worry about what she knew. And then, of course, they could move on to that, the next step, which was the POTUS himself. So, I'm researching this as it relates to Kennedy and the other overdoses that surround people with knowledge about Kennedy and the Zodiac murders, where the Zodiac cipher solves by Harriet Suchet are messages about what he knows in regards to these political issues. He's been practicing drugging and poisoning, and so have others. If they really expect us to believe that JFK was assassinated and then he had literally both his mistresses died either from an overdose or a shooting, and that was just a coincidence, I think everybody needs to rethink things at this point, because you don't kill two mistresses and a president without some type of a connection or reasoning there. All right, on to the next. So this is the work history from 1962 to 1972, and we can see up here that in 1962, when he injured his lower back, and then he talks about a surgery that occurred in 1970, or I'm sorry, December 5th in 1966 at Fort Miley was actually where he had that surgery, and that's listed right here. This can explain the lumber in his walk that was reported in the Zodiac murders. Other instances of some of these crimes, they talk about the person walking with a limp or some type of an issue with their back. So again, Jack fits right into that notion, or at least the description of the killer at that time. On November 15th of 1962, we had some more of what we refer to as the mob involvement with Irene Lentz, or Irene Gibbons. It is stated that she committed suicide by jumping out a window. However, we know that jumping out windows and things of that nature due to the mob was something that probably created or caused the Nevada hotels and casinos to actually have locked or windows that do not open, so that this could no longer happen. It reminds me of the real estate business back in 2007, as I watched the piles and stacks of paper grow larger to close a home loan, because every time somebody sued or somebody got in trouble, there was a new disclosure that we had to fill out so that they were aware of it. And that's kind of reminds me of what occurred with these particular casinos. Now, granted, some people jumped out these windows just because they blew their entire income or their next month's rent and didn't know how to go home and talk to their wives. However, Irene was said to have borrowed money from the mob to open up her own business, Irene Inc. The mob opened several businesses across the U.S. in Irene's name in order to launder money. And then the last contract that she actually had for working was with actual MGM. Back to the media reference again. So, and there was a relation there with Mickey Cohen, which is another known mob member. So jumping out the hotel window, we also saw that happen in one of the cases of one of the scientists in the MK Ultra program. He had been slipped some LSD by Gottlieb at a conference and then jumped out a window to his death. Of course, he may have been thrown out that window. We have no clue or no idea. They're just going to report it as a suicide. So 2 suicides that are revolving around being out the window of a hotel, revolving around these people. So we have, let's see, on November 5th, 1962, 3 weeks before her 61st birthday, Lentz took room 1129 at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles, checking in under an assumed name. Now, so why would she have to do that unless she was running from someone? So I'm starting to question the whole idea of committing suicide. If you check in under an assumed name, it would be assumed that you're trying to get away from somebody. You don't want somebody to know you're there. So why jump out a window and make it nationally known that you were there and committed suicide? Again, not quite making any sense. She had left suicide notes for friends and family, for her ailing husband, and for the hotel residents, apologizing for any inconvenience her death might have caused. Per her wishes, she says she is interred next to her husband, Director F. Richard Jones, at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California. Now, this isn't the first time that we've also seen suicide notes that were written by a victim where they ultimately were purported to have committed suicide, but all of the information really pointed to the fact that they wouldn't have committed suicide. And in this particular case, Irene may very well have. She may have gotten herself in too deep, borrowed too much money, couldn't pay it back, and then in that event wanted to just do away with herself so that nobody found out about her conspiring with the mob to launder money. Now, we have our first murder back in the lower Southern California area, and it is on June 4th of 1963, the Robert Dominguez and Linda Edwards. We know that that these type of murders, these Lever Lanes murders, or where couples are together, or something that are consistent with Texarkana, with the Zodiac, and then with the Dominguez and Edwards murder on a beach near Gaviota. In Santa Barbara area. They were shot to death on the beach, 19 bullets. Let's see, 19 bullets were shot total, 11 were shot at Robert and 8 shot at Linda. Linda's bathing suit was torn off and found near the bodies, but no rape was claimed. So again, it's made to look like some type of a sexual deviant when it isn't. The connection made, there was a connection made to this couple's murder to Vanden Air Force Base. No coincidence, due to a lot number of unspent ammunition at the scene. Again, why would the killer leave behind unspent ammunition? Vandenberg Air Force Base is a space flight and liftoff for missiles or space shuttles. Again, a relation to NASA, under the jurisdiction of the 30th Space Wing Air Force Space Command, which is NASA. Some information that I was able to actually dig up on this was that in 1972, Santa Barbara Sheriff John Carpenter made a public statement to the effect that the Zodiac may have killed 2 Lompoc teenagers in 1963. He claims there were significant similarities in crimes and was quoted as saying, "There is other evidence which I am not at liberty to disclose at this time to link the Zodiac to the slayings." Now, wouldn't it be nice if the public had this information? Because at this point in time, we can see that they're not going to solve this crime conceivably. So why not let us know what that other information is so that we can form our own opinion and put this case together ourselves? The rest of this up here by the Press Courier is really just kind of describing what had occurred and what was going on. Some of the things I hadn't mentioned yet is the sheriff's deputy said leaves and other debris were piled around the lean-to where the bodies were in Gaviota, 25 miles north of Santa Barbara, and there were burned matches nearby, indicating that the murder may have tried to turn the shelter into a funeral pyre. That takes me back to the Zodiac making the statements that some of the deaths will occur by fire. And we do know that Jack has had structural fire training. So a little more irony there if he wasn't capable of actually setting the fire after learning how to put them out. Now things start to get extremely interesting for me. I got really excited in the research this last week. I want to read an article to you guys. It's from the San Jose News, Friday, September 13th of 1963. Crap shooters get jump on gunmen. Charles Terrence, the brother of Jack, the one that he keeps disappearing with. We've talked a little bit about this. He also has that dark curly hair in some of the composite sketches of some of the killings that we've looked at. There are multiple composites, and one of them always shows a dark curly-haired man, and I did find that Charles actually fit that description. So, Charles Terrence, 28, of Burlingame, broke up a crap game Thursday. Today, he is under guard in county hospital, suffering from multiple head lacerations and awaiting misdemeanor weapons charges. Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Ray Howard managed to piece together this story. Thomas F. Johnson, 46 years of age, of 2314 Madden Avenue, and 7 other workers from a body shop and nearby battery shop. Let's put the battery shop together because we know Jack just recently owned one. In fact, actually, I believe he owns one at this particular time in Texas, but that they are from a battery shop on Alum Rock Avenue, clambered aboard his bus. So Mr. Johnson owned a bus at this particular time on Thursday and drove up to Halls Valley for a crap game. The 1946 bus had been converted into a camper with bunk beds, curtains, and all the comforts of home. While they were shooting the dice, again, we're going to talk about the Zodiac and dice. The players did some drinking, and after a while, things got out of hand. Johnson went to the front of the bus and called his wife at home on a Citizens Band radio. Mrs. Johnson's brother, Terrence. So Mrs. Johnson, I'm finding out, is Ella Dean, because that is the only sister of Charles and Jack Terrence. So Mrs. Johnson's brother, Terrence, Charles Terrence, drove her up Mount Hamilton Road to the game. Why she was going to go up there. I have no idea. Sending Charles, I understand, but her showing up as well, she probably just sat in the car. Either way, Terrence appeared at the door of the bus with a .22 pistol in his hand. No one paid much attention, so Terrence said, "Leave the money where it is," and fired a shot into the roof of the bus. The crap shooters then jumped him and took away the gun. The passerbys noticed the scuffle and called the deputies. So basically what we have here is, number one, we have this bus, that's 1946 bus, when 3 years from now, we're going to literally be talking about the bus bomb diagrams and the insistence on the Zodiac to take out children on a bus, which he then recanted and stated that you're crazy if you thought I was ever going to do that. I surmised by those letters that the bus bomb was actually Jack, and that Jack, with no address at the time, was literally living out of a bus. And then I find this article that supports his family, in fact, had a bus that was converted into a home, basically. So Dewhurst incorrectly states that Jack was a part of this plot in his book, but the article tells it correctly. I believe that unless the media has changed the name of the individuals involved, which again is not something I put past anybody. When I see that Jack's been arrested 3 times and not once is his correct name listed on any of those indictments. So several things come from this article for me. Jack's sister, Ella Dean, aka Sue Ellen Cade, did a number of years in federal prison for bank robbery. So maybe she was the type of woman that would show up to a scuffle on a bus where they're attempting to rob everybody of their money. Here is Jack's brother Charles attempting to rob the bus that I believe Jack will later use in his Zodiac ploy, and the use of a .22 caliber pistol, which is prominent in the upcoming crimes as well as the past crimes. Mr. Johnson used a citizens band radio to contact his wife. Well, we know that Jack was a ham radio operator, and it is fitting that his brother also was the same, since we know that when Jack attended the A School of Electronics for the military, that his brother had actually been with him, picked up the wife, dropped the wife off, and then we see Jack is entering the military. Following that, and had been gone for 6 months for this particular course, in which case Charles's wife had indicated she had been left in Arkansas for 6 months. So that kind of coincides, and it's possible that Charles also had this type of training. Mr. Johnson, this clearly states that the 1946 bus was converted into living quarters, which I believe was the bus bomb that the Zodiac was talking about, which was himself, especially with his sign off of no address in one of the I call it the no address letter. We're going to come up and see that in the FBI FOIA files in the Zodiac case, but he literally lists at the bottom no address. Could mean one of two things. He's living in caves, which we know that was something that he actually did and admitted to, or he was living in this bus and the caves. Either way, and having no address meant that he was basically floating around, and that puts ties pretty much this information together. The craps game or dice, which is mentioned by the Zodiac, paradise. He listed paradise, but he spelt it with a C, and spelling it incorrectly I do not think was a mistake. Jack was very intelligent. I believe a lot of the misspellings in the Zodiac letters were to dumb down the author's capabilities, and I can show how those spelling errors are literally inserted on purpose, and we'll talk about that at a later time. But literally, it was said that paradise was also a interpretation of a pair of dice in gambling. And so we're going to see that paradise runs with South Lake Tahoe, where Jack ends up. Paradise is listed on the Zodiac card. And then, of course, we see now that there's craps games going on inside this bus. So this bus was located in the San Jose, Santa Clara area, where we know Jack was working and living at that time during the Zodiac. So Dewhurst writes that Jack used a bus as a vehicle and home in the early 60s. I think that he has the time frame off a little bit, and the true owner of the bus during the early 60s. Dewhurst writes that Jack and Charles were the people involved in the 63 article, but we show that it's Charles and Thomas F. Johnson. If Jack had the bus early 1960s, it was likely he had left it in California at the end of 63 when he left to Texas. I was not made aware of any type of a bus or a bus living arrangement by Dolores, his second wife, who had indicated she had followed him to Texas herself. There was never any mention of this bus, though I might have taken some time to ask that. I didn't think about it at the time when we had her on the phone. Jack's stories about gambling bus used as his primary vehicle, hunting cabin, at a home at one point. So maybe this bus was something that they were using for hunting and for gambling, and it didn't become his home until late 1960s. Either way, we talk about the no address, and we know where that leads to. These lines of reasoning conclude that Jack did own a bus and he did use it as a residence. Dewhurst believes that the Zodiac was the product of a pent-up hatred that Jack carried due to the bikini testing of the nuclear bomb and what it had done to the Japanese, getting failed in the military class even though he achieved a passing grade. He had been sold out to his wife, Letha, by the military, stealing him away from his only true love, Eco, and his first love being taken by the police in the bootlegging incident, coupled with the humiliation that he and Charles faced at the hands of SFPD when he returned to the military in 1950. I'm going to say, he quotes that it's either late 54 or early 54 or late 55. Either way, he believes that all of these were the triggers for Jack, but I tend to believe that there's a lot more going on here, that his inner rage started long before that, and he's a product of what I call a blueprint designed killer. Through circumstances in life, he was a hired gun and a product of government experiments. The journal of this serial killer, or the communications that we find in these cases, reveal such things, tying the mob, politics, media, and underground syndicates into a neat little system of getting what they want. We have some information here. All right. This was actually set up as a live presentation that I could manipulate as I went through it, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to throw it all onto the page. I was able to actually look up, this is a picture from 1963, another piece of equipment that Jack had designed for General Electric that they patented. It separated water from the waste at the nuclear power plant, and obviously is still being used today. The link that I have listed up here is actually one of the historical books in which I was able to find one of the people listed in this photo, which was Clyde Solms. He's over here to the left. He had been working for General Electric in San Jose, California, and most importantly, that his roots are from Chicago, Illinois. So we're going to see this flip-flop back and forth. I'm going to keep mentioning these places over and over again because everybody seems to be revolving around these situations. We have this other gentleman here listed in the picture as George White. I question whether or not that's George White of MK Ultra. I do have that picture, which shows George White to be a rather large man and rather plump in 1954, 1955. However, in 63, we're at 8 years later, and we can already see the different transformations that Jack has made in his own appearance from one time frame to the next. So I question and wonder whether or not George White was the actual George Hunter White of the MK Ultra. It's probably not, but worth questioning. Months after the end of the government project using non-consenting. So literally at this particular point in time in 1963, the government project MK Ultra has been shut down on using non-consenting volunteers by John Vance, who was a member of the CIA's Inspector General staff. So in 1963, they say they called it quits on using it on unwitting victims. However, I highly doubt that ever stopped. The backside of this picture indicates September 26th, 1963. Jack Terrence, test foreman once again, with George White, president of Atomic Power Department at General Electric, discussing hydraulic system designed and built by Jack T at a cost of $110,000. The system shown only part. So it's only showing part of the system that we looked at, and the system represents test facility for atomic power components. Knowing that Jack is still working for GE in 63, but sometime between this picture and the end of 63, Jack up and left GE to Llano, Texas. He left a $50,000 a year job for what Dolores told me was to put up 2 mobile homes on a property that he owned in Texas. And that's when he bought the battery store. So Doris joined him at some point shortly after. She worked for Human Resources Department, even though Dewhurst's book indicated that she was a secretary. She indicates that she worked for Human Resources, and that Jack moving her to Texas could have given him the opportunity to write the letter we're going to talk about here shortly, on that trip that provoked this next communication and instilled the presence of the maniac still being in California just before Jack actually 86s himself to Texas. So, per Doris Reynolds Terrence, who worked in human resources of GE, Jack left GE in the end of 63. The exact month is not known. My conversation with Doris, she stated that Jack went to Oklahoma first. We do show him back and forth in Oklahoma and then to Texas, but no specifics on a month. Dennis claims that Jack would often make a trip to Oklahoma for marijuana to distribute, and Jack kept a post office box there too. From now until early 1966, Jack is in Texas. Mr. Dewhurst's book indicates that Jack bought the U.S. Battery and Electric Company, but I have no corroborated evidence, nor can I explain where Jack would have gotten the money for this. Again, why would anyone leave a job at a nuclear power plant as a test foreman before working at a battery company? Of course, Dewhurst theorizes that Jack had reached his cap, or he'd hit the ceiling of where he was going to be able to go in this particular company. And they then started moving him into a training position where he was no longer designing, but training. And that was not fit for Jack. So that was one of the explanations as to why he left. It also ties into the Zodiac bus bomb diagram that shows BAT as the source of power on the diagrams that we're going to see, which BAT is the exact abbreviation that Jack uses in his own diagram. So another coincidence there. And Jack always has a camera on him. And this particular photograph, which we see Jack in, is consistent with some of the other photos that we had throughout the time frame. This picture is taken in an old school film that produced a version of a picture that is a lesser quality than the Michigan pictures. So that may tell me that the Michigan pictures came at a later date rather than where I placed them with the earlier murders. Doris claimed that Jack separated from GE, took the severance pay that he was given, and bought properties to put up mobile homes, and he bought the battery shop in Austin, Texas. So again, some conflicting information. Lano was quite a distance from Austin, Texas, so still trying to figure out where Jack's at this point. By the end of 1947, Carlos Marcello had taken control of Louisiana's illegal gambling network. He had also, I wanted to bring him back into play because obviously he was in control of Louisiana by 1947. But as early as 1934, we saw the murder of a young man in New Orleans on the dock. And the letter that was found on him also contained the Zodiac symbol. Now, of course, somebody in 1934 wasn't still committing crimes, as far into what I'm going to support that Jack has. So that is a little before Jack's time, but might indicate that the symbol is something that is used by this particular crime syndicate or a group of individuals, as it has been suspected that there are more than one person involved in some of these crimes. Looks like we are down to our last minute, so I am going to briefly go through this and then sign off. He also had joined forces with the Genovese crime family, which was associated with Meyer Lansky in order to skim money from some of the most important casinos in the New Orleans area shortly after becoming associated with the Todaro family through marriage. According to former members of the Chicago outfit, Marcello was also assigned a cut of money skimmed from Las Vegas casinos in exchange for providing muscle in Florida real estate deals. By this time, Marcello had also been selected as the godfather of the New Orleans Mafia by the family's capos. And with the approval of the commission after the deportation of his predecessor, Corolla, to Sicily. He held this position for the next 30 years. And in 1975, on an extortion trial, 2 witnesses described Marcello as the godfather of the New Orleans crime syndicate. A CIA member headed the Hypnosis for Hire program in Nevada, also indicating that his major hubs were in Dallas, Texas, and in Chicago. So he controlled these 3 areas, which again tie back into Jack's happenstances and whereabouts, and may lead us possibly to who Jack was working for. We don't know. All right, you guys, that's all we have for today. Have a wonderful weekend. We will see you next week with the continuation. I'm signing off. Take care, everyone.